nobody on the Bengals team that's made a significant contribution this season outside of the punter that is over the age of 29 years old.
Wow.
This is a phenomenally good and phenomenally young Cincinnati Bengals team.
And I mean, there's no question. There's no questioning the defense is elite because they've got all pros at basically every level on that defense. Linebacker, safety, Talanoa Hufanga, and you've got Nick Bosa. He's an outstanding defense.
The one stat that I always am absolutely amazed by is that Robbie Gold, at the age of 40, has still never ever missed a kick in the postseason.
Oh, I know.
Which is just absolutely unbelievable.
Okay, so hello and welcome back to the SJMoores podcast. And today, again, we're back again. It's another NFL podcast. We've got a lot of them lately. And it's Conference Championship weekend, which is essentially, if you don't follow the sport well enough, it's the semi-finals basically to get into the Super Bowl. And there's the AFC Championship, the NFC Championship, and the winner of both of them face off in the Super Bowl. And I've got Shaun Blundell here, host of the Full 10 Yards podcast with me to break down Championship weekend, but also go through the Divisional Round that has just happened and talk about the international games that we'll see in 2023 as well. So how are you doing, Shaun, mate?
Yeah, I'm all good, mate. Thanks for having me on. It's my favourite weekend of the season. I know you just said it's semi-final week, but I actually really like this weekend coming up. I think you often get the four best teams, and obviously you get two games back-to-back. So, yeah, for real fans of the sport, if you like getting 6 or 7 hours of football back-to-back with real high quality, mate, I really love this weekend. So really looking forward to it.
Oh, I couldn't agree more, mate. I couldn't agree more. We saw, we saw last year with the Chiefs Bengals game that it completely flipped. The start of the game, the Kansas City dominated, and the end of the game, Cincinnati came away with it. And things change like that. It's the four best teams, as you say, and I think it's pretty fair to say that we have got the four best teams or at least the two best teams in each conference in these playoffs in the Conference Championship weekend. I think that's pretty fair to say, right?
Yeah, I'd completely agree, mate. I think over the course of the season, they often say, don't they, you are what your record suggests that you are. And I think, we've pretty much come down to probably the four best teams overall. I think you could probably argue at one point on Saturday, and I know we're going to quickly look back at the games, because of the two teams that got eliminated Saturday, you could have almost argued that the six best teams from the season were actually left in play at the start of Sunday. Obviously, two were going to get eliminated, two obviously did, but yeah, it really is when the class rises during the real meaningful January football. So yeah, we've got some excellent games still to look forward to.
Okay, well, let's get into the podcast, and we'll just quickly we'll gloss over the international games that are going on into the end of 2023. So it'll be in October, November time, November for the Germany games. So last Thursday, the NFL announced the 5 designated AFC home teams for the 2023 International Series. So with the expansion to a 17-game schedule, it's now rotating between the AFC and the NFC as to who in the extra game will host international games. So this year is the AFC, and the 5 teams that will play internationally are the Buffalo Bills, Tennessee Titans, Jacksonville Jaguars, Kansas City Chiefs, and the New England Patriots. Like I said before, there are 3 in London. There's been 1 in Munich and 1 in Frankfurt as well, because there's no Mexico game this year because Estadio Azteca is being renovated in order to host the 2026 World Cup in Mexico, US, and Canada. But I mean, when these 5 teams were announced, obviously we expected the Jags. But what were your initial thoughts last week?
I think it's great, mate. I think the last time we spoke, you were doing your piece around the international series as a whole, and I said then I think we're extremely lucky, fortunate, and we probably almost come to expect it now that these teams regularly give up these home games. I know it's now part of a cycle, and as you say, it just happens to be that it's the AFC's turn this year. There's obviously a few conspiracy theories out there that the NFL might experiment with the London games, with some of the teams potentially playing back-to-back weeks. I know that that's been mooted. Obviously, the fact that both of the Titans and the Jags being home teams, obviously in the same division, it does leave them potential options for that to come into play. So we'll wait and see whether they do go down that route or not. But look, there's going to be massive appetite for the Bills in particular in this country. I think we saw that with the Packers last year, didn't we? That Packers were the last team to actually come and play in England. I think the Bills, obviously one of the most supported franchises, being on that East Coast region as well. And obviously playing extremely well at the moment, aren't they? So I think that will obviously be the hottest ticket in town, so to speak. The other two are intriguing, aren't they? The Jags often, you sort of think, oh, the Jags are coming again. But, this is a different Jags team now. Young, lots of talent. Trevor Lawrence looks like he might be the real deal. I think they've nailed the coaching hire in terms of Doug Pederson. I think looking back, it's a travesty that he didn't get more looks than what he actually got last off-season, and that's already reaping its rewards for Jacksonville. So that'll be a good side to watch, you would feel, for a number of years. And obviously, Tennessee have been perennial division winners up until they obviously hit the stumbling blocks this year. So a bit of a rebuild job there. It'll be interesting to see what kind of version of the Tennessee Titans we get. So they're the UK ones. I think in terms of Germany, I think it was always likely to be that they'd look to expand that. I think that was a huge success this year. You could tell from all of the interactions on Twitter and that kind of stuff, for the fans that made the journey over there. Because even obviously a game in Germany is so much more accessible for us as UK fans to get across to. And obviously, it's a big scoop, isn't getting the Kansas City Chiefs potential Super Bowl winners. We'll obviously wait and see how the next few weeks play out. But whether they do win the big one or not, to get Patrick Mahomes playing in Germany, that's going to be a massive, massive draw for people. And obviously New England, because of how dominant and successful they've been for as long as they have, up until the last few years. If you just got into the NFL for the last 2 years, you'll probably think the New England Patriots, well, who on earth are they? Well, they were the team that absolutely dominated for about a 15-year period. So yeah, they'll be heavily supported. So look, it's great. It continues to sort of demonstrate the fact that the game has really grown on a global scale. But yeah, I'm looking forward to joining the queue to try and get some tickets, mate. Fingers crossed.
Yeah, you nailed it on the head there. The teams that have been picked, especially the Chiefs and the Bills, they're two of the biggest ticket sellers in the world right now, because you've got Josh Allen, you've got Patrick Mahomes, you've got superstars all over the park, really. All 5 teams the past 2 years have been in the playoffs. Obviously the 3 teams that are in the playoffs this year, they all make the divisional round as well. So there's that. Recently they've all been really good. And yeah, you mentioned the Jags, the potential of them playing 2 or 3 games in London this year. There's been a lot of chat on social media about that, and it is possible with with them playing all 3 home teams in London. But do you think that could actually happen? If so, do you think it's a good thing if it was to happen, or what do you think about that?
Look, it gives the NFL an opportunity to experiment with what they want to experiment. I think it all depends what they want out of it. There's obviously been this continued talk of would a franchise work over here on a permanent basis. This is as good a measuring stick as they potentially have based on their current circumstances to try it out, isn't it? If they could get the Jags to play, 2 or 3 games here over the course of a month, who knows whether that would be viewed as a success or not. The difficult thing is, and I went to the Jags game this year or this season just gone, so it was October of last year. And although that was a Jags home game, it was a heavily Denver-dominated crowd.
Yeah, it was.
And I think that's the issue. I don't think it's an issue selling games out when it comes to the NFL International Series. I think we could get the 2 worst franchises in the league, and the game would sell out. There's obviously always that little bit of novelty when your team hasn't been for a while. If you're a fan of the team, you'll always go because we probably want to go every week, but we can't because we can't fly every week, most of us. So you'll always have the regular supporters, and then there'll always be the intrigue from the casual fan that hasn't seen a team for a while. Look, my view on a permanent international team is it probably won't ever get off the ground. If I'm being honest, that's my view of it. But it certainly gives the league an opportunity to experiment. So I wouldn't be surprised if they took the opportunity. But on the flip side of it, I also wouldn't be massively surprised if it was just those 3 teams are the home teams and they're 3 completely separate away teams. I wouldn't be surprised either way.
Yeah, and like you said, I think there's no better time to test whether a franchise will work now. In the UK with a good Jags team with a franchise quarterback. If they're going to be interested now, if they're not interested now, then they're not going to be interested ever in a franchise. You know what I mean? So I think you're spot on there. And yeah, I personally also share the opinion that international franchise just wouldn't work logistically and everything. So yeah, I share your opinion there. But let's get into the games that we saw in Divisional Round on Saturday and Sunday last week. And we'll go just in the order they played. So we'll start with the Jags-Chiefs game. So Patrick Mahomes, a banged up Patrick Mahomes, made it a fifth AFC title game in a row as they beat the Jacksonville Jaguars and Kansas City Chiefs in 27-20. It was 7-0 to end the first quarter. And after, at the very end of the first quarter is when Patrick Mahomes suffered his high ankle sprain after being landed on by the Jags defensive end, Josh Allen. So it was a high ankle sprain. He initially stayed in the game, but eventually was replaced by Chad Henne midway through the second quarter with 10-7 lead. And actually, Chad Henne came in and played pretty well, actually. Found Travis Kelce to make it 17-7 before the 2-minute warning. And it was 17-10 at half time. But it wasn't it for Patrick Mahomes. He came back in after half time, still hopping on one leg, though, as he was through most of the second quarter that he played. And ultimately, once Mahomes back in the game, the Chiefs were always going to win it. But I always felt the Jags were in this one, but it just felt that they were always a couple pieces away to make, a real impact against the Chiefs. Because Trevor Lawrence, he didn't have the early playoff nerves he had in the Chargers game the week before, and ultimately it was Mahomes and Travis Kelce who won the game for the Chiefs. And it was promising for the Jags, but their time had to end in the playoffs eventually, and the Chiefs rightly deserved to be this far, I think.
Yeah, I would agree. It always felt as though Kansas City had just about got Jacksonville at arm's length. Like you say, the scoreboard will tell you that it was never completely out of hand. The largest lead the Chiefs had at any one point was 10. It was never ever a blowout, but it always felt as though there were possibly gears for the Chiefs to go up if they needed to. It felt very much like they managed the situation with Patrick Mahomes. You just alluded to it there. I thought it was a sensational drive from Chad Henne. A lot of it was done on the ground in terms of what Isaiah Pacheco did, but that drive in particular, for Chad Henne to come in after not throwing a meaningful pass all year and put that kind of a drive together was just it's an embarrassment to riches that the Chiefs are playing with, isn't it? Let's be honest, because that was phenomenal what he did. A little bit surprised to some extent that Mahomes did come back out based on that drive. You'd have thought they maybe would try to have managed the situation with Chad Henne. But then again, I suppose because the game never did get beyond that 10-point score margin, maybe that's the reason that they did ultimately keep Mahomes in. Obviously, attention will turn to how he recovers, and I know we're going to get on to previewing what the upcoming games are, but that'll obviously have a massive impact moving forward. It's one of those type of injuries with any sort of sprain that when you initially do it, a bit of adrenaline kicks in and all of that kind of good stuff. It's normally the day after that it really starts to hurt. So it'll be interesting to see what level of Patrick Mahomes we get come the championship games this weekend. But as you say, it was a game dominated by Travis Kelce. 14 receptions for Travis Kelce off 17 targets, which is just absolutely ludicrous. He hadn't had a touchdown for the last 6 weeks of the regular season, but caught the 2 through the air in this one. And yeah, like you say, it just felt as though the Chiefs had just got a touch too much class, a touch too much. Now it's all about them. But certainly the Jags, not disgraced in this at all. Certainly plenty of encouragement for them as a franchise moving forward. I think it's been an excellent second half of the season. I just alluded to the fact that I saw them at Wembley. When they lost that game at Wembley, they dropped to 2-6 on the season.
Yeah.
And you just thought, here we go, here's another typical sort of Jacksonville season. But whatever happened on that flight home, it must have been a good flight, because they obviously only lost one game then the rest of the way, and then obviously getting through this far in the playoffs as well. Christian Kirk's been a real good acquisition for them. There was a lot of ridicule when he signed for big money, but I think he's proven probably decent value for money. I would say, and he was their big threat on the weekend. He was the one that scored their touchdown. So like I say, plenty to be encouraged, but yeah, it just felt as though the Chiefs had got a touch too much, and ultimately they're the number one seed for a reason, aren't they? So yeah, class held in the end.
Yeah, exactly, and yeah, you summed it up well there. But the Chiefs, yeah, they ultimately were a better team, but the Jags, there's a lot of promise, and especially when you add Calvin Ridley to that offense next year, they have got a lot of cap rooms. They can make some moves in free agency again still. Then, you've got a real promise there, and especially with the AFC South being probably the weakest division of football, the Jags can really put a stronghold in for the next couple of seasons now. I mean, they've certainly got the best quarterback in the division, whoever Houston decides to draft. Anyway, okay, let's get on to the game on Saturday night. We saw the Eagles show class in a gigantic victory versus the New York Giants, and it started off with a bang. The first pass by Jalen Hurts deep to Devontae Smith, a lovely ball, one of the best balls I've seen him throw for a while, probably ever in the NFL, with him being much better now than he was at the start of his career. And then the Dallas got it 100 grab that he just sort of took away, trucked into the end zone, and the Eagles were up hot straight away. On the very next drive, Daniel Jones held on to the ball for too long on the fourth and short. They decided to go for it, and obviously he was sacked, and it was a turnover on downs. And that's something that Daniel Jones tends to do quite a lot. He's had a very good year, but he has one of the longest times to throw in the NFL this season. I think it's like 2.99 seconds, which is compared to it's half a second slower than a lot of quarterbacks in the league, especially the elite ones. And then, the Eagles were quickly up 14-0. Devontae Smith scored in the screen pass, and it wasn't the first time we saw that play. It wasn't the last time we saw that play on the weekend. We saw the same play on Sunday for the Bengals. And at the end of the first, James Bradbury, he picked off his old teammate Daniel Jones. Must have felt good after being cut by the Giants in the summer. Boston Scott made it 21-0. His 11th TD versus the Giants of his 21 in total, which I thought was a great start when they revealed that on Saturday night. So I mean, by the first half, it was all Philly, and the Giants ran the ball well in the second half, but the Eagles are just too good. And ultimately, again, I think it got to the point where the Giants were never good enough to win that game, but they got a big future of Brian Daboll, who I think will win Coach of the Year.
I think there's a chance he wins Coach of the Year. Absolutely, I think they've certainly outperformed expectations. So he's certainly in there with the shouts. We opened the podcast, didn't we, by saying that we've probably got the best teams that are left. I think certainly on the NFC side, I think there's been a real gulf in class between the top two and everybody else. I actually picked the Giants to beat the Vikings in the previous week because I felt as though Minnesota, despite their record, were a team that has shown lots of vulnerability. They unbelievably won all 11 games that were decided by one score, which just never, ever happens. And it felt as though that was a kind of game that was more even than it probably should have been. Obviously, the 4 seed went out last week, and like I said, I just think that the general depth and the quality on this NFC side just wasn't as strong. So it really wasn't a surprise to see this as the kind of blowout that it was. It was the typical Philadelphia Eagles type of game. And if you look at the box score, you could probably pick any box score from the first 12 weeks of the season when the Eagles went on that long undefeated run. Because Jalen Hurts doesn't wow you in terms of his stats. He only threw for 154 yards in this one. And as you rightly said, 40 yards of those came on the first play. Take that 40 yards away, he was 15 completions for just over 110 yards, which is nothing in today's NFL. In a league designed for the ball to move through the air with regularity, but he's efficient. Like I say, 16 to 24, 2 touchdowns, got in on the ground. That's a huge part of his game. But it wasn't just him. Like I say, Boston Scott got one, Kenneth Gainwell got one, Miles Sanders probably deserved one. He ran pretty well on the weekend as well. And like you say, they just absolutely dominated at the line of scrimmage. I said on the Full 10 Yards podcast going into it that we felt that the Giants offensively would have to almost play the perfect game. I thought the week before they played excellently, but I think, again, a lot of that hindsight will tell you is because of the Vikings defense being really poor. This Eagles defense is a different beast altogether. It's a much more rounded defense. The defensive line is full of superstars, and Daniel Jones just didn't have the time or the ability to use his legs to the same effect that he had the previous week. I thought the previous week he was phenomenal in terms of on the ground, in that playoff win. He only carried the ball 6 times this weekend for 24 yards compared to 17 times for 78 yards in the previous week. And that just goes to show the difference in terms of the level of the defensive line play. to be fair to the Giants, you look if I was to read these names to you, I'm somebody that considers myself to be a big fan of the NFL, and I look through this depth chart, and it's like people like Isaiah Hodgins, Daniel Bellinger, Lawrence Cager, Marcus Johnston, Gary Brightwell, Richie J. They're not superstars. Nobody's drafting these guys in fantasy football. Nobody knows who half of these guys are. So your shout for Brian Dable in terms of coach of the year has certainly got validity because he's really maximised what he's got at his disposal. The Giants need to add some quality to this roster. I think this is the difficult thing now for teams that go out at this stage of the year. The expectation level next year for the Giants will be naturally much higher because they've reached the playoffs this year. I don't know what they do moving forward, though. Daniel Jones, they didn't pick up the fifth-year option. I don't know what the going market rate for Daniel Jones is going to be, but he probably falls into that category of a quarterback that he's probably better than some that you might get. But is he good enough? Probably not, if you're being honest. But what do they do? Do they swing for another rookie? Do they go the more veteran route? But if you go the veteran route, look at somebody like Derek Carr, for example. Derek Carr is going to cost probably a lot more than Daniel Jones, and is he that much better? I don't really know the answer to that question. But they certainly need an influx, I would say, of offensive talent, particularly at the skill positions. Saquon Barkley is a superstar, but certainly at the wide receiver room, I think they need more than what they've got. But the Eagles march on, and like I say, we'll get into that game, but this is the game that, as me as a neutral, well, look, I'm really looking forward to both games. But I mean, I think one's got the chance of being an offensive shootout, and one's got the chance of probably being a really entertaining 13-12 defensive slugfest. There's two sides to the ball. I always tell people it hasn't got to be a high scorer to be a good game of football. And I think this second one, this NFC one, could fall into the slightly lower scoring but equally as intriguing bracket with the two teams that are left. And like you say, Philadelphia certainly deserved to win on Saturday night and bullied the Giants, in all honesty.
Yeah, totally right there. Okay, so moving on to Sunday now, and there sadly weren't any snow angels in Buffalo for the Bills as the Bengals marched on, winning 27-10 at Highmark Stadium in Buffalo. And I mean, with the odds stacked against them, the Bengals were able to defeat the Bills, with three starters missing on the offensive line, and that was a big worry going into the game. The Bengals got out really hot, actually, going up 14-0 through Jamar Chase and Hayden Hurst touchdowns. And I mean, the Hayden Hurst one was the same play that we saw in Philadelphia the night before as well from Devontae Smith. I mean, and if anything, actually, the Bills' offensive line looked the most under pressure, to be honest with you. They were the worst performing offensive line in that game. And I mean, Josh Allen kept the minute, getting a TD just before the half to make it 17 or 14-17, and the Bengals got a field goal to make it 17-17. But the Bills never really felt like they were in this one. We always hold it back in our mind. Oh, it's Allen, it's Diggs. They can score in 40 seconds. They can get back in it. But every time I went into a drive thinking that, watching this, and it just never happened. It was just a lot of what if. And I mean, Josh Allen and Stephon Diggs weren't really on the same page before, during, and after the game. Really, it's sort of what's gone on there the last past weeks really confusing. And I mean, the Bengals. I mean, they dominated this one. The time of possession says otherwise, but I mean, it's the fact that I think in the first half, I think Cincinnati had 13 first downs. I think Buffalo had about 3, and that was the Bills held on to the ball, for quite a bit of the time, but they just couldn't produce a functioning offense against the Bengals defense. I think that's pretty much how the game went. I don't know if you see the same way.
Yeah, look, I mean, hindsight's a wonderful thing, really. This was game over after the first 10 minutes of the game, wasn't it? As you say, Cincinnati marched to a 14-0 lead. And I think the expectation was, well, the Bills will find some way to get their way back into it. But everything just looked really difficult for the Bills on Sunday. The conditions weren't great. I've got to be honest, I'm sick and tired of hearing the take that these teams that play in cold weather areas and they say they should be used to the snow and they should take the snow and use it to their advantage. I'm sorry, snow is no advantage to anybody. It is the ultimate equaliser, and it just makes for a poor spectacle, if I'm being honest. There's all this sort of, machismo that, it's a man's game and they should roll the sleeves up and it's only a bit of snow. I'm sorry, that's just so antiquated. It just doesn't improve the product on the field, and ultimately, the Bills didn't adjust to the conditions. The Bengals did. The Bengals were fantastic. Like you say, the offensive line was a worry going in. It was probably as dominant an offensive line performance as the Bengals have put out in years. And I'm not just saying that as an exaggeration to prove the point. It was genuinely that good. Joe Burrow had lots of time. He only took one sack. There were plenty of running lanes available. I thought Joe Mixon had a nice game. The Bengals just felt like they had a really good balance to the offense. And that's the biggest problem for me and the Buffalo Bills, and it has been for the last couple of years. When it gets to January, their lack of running game does come back to hurt them. And I've said this for the last couple of years now. I have no worries about the Bills reaching this kind of stage of the season. I think they've got enough offensive firepower. Josh Allen's good enough, and like you say, his connection with Stephon Diggs, etc., has been great throughout the regular season. But when you get to this kind of stage, they don't have that complementary running game that takes the pressure off the offense, that keeps the defense honest and makes them play the run as well as play the pass. They only attempted, outside of scrambles for Josh Allen, 11 rushes by their running backs on Sunday in a game that it was snowing. Now, I'm sorry, but in theory, if the snow is this great equaliser, it's because you should be a hard-nosed running football team if you want to go down that line. The Bills aren't a hard-nosed running football team, and ultimately, they massively paid the price. James Cook was drafted, Dalvin's brother who plays for the Vikings, to supposedly be the answer. He's had a really, really disappointing season. He's never, ever got going. Devin Singletary's been there a couple of years now. His final stat line was 6 attempts, 24 yards. It's nothing to write home about at all. Is it 4 yards a carry? But, certainly not threatening anybody. And look, Buffalo have been through a lot this season. Obviously, they had all the DeMar Hamlin stuff a few weeks ago, which obviously would have been a massive thing emotionally for them to try and deal with and overcome. But let's not forget the team on the other side of the field that night were the Cincinnati Bengals. And there was never going to be an ideal solution for the league in terms of home field advantages and seedings and all this, that, and the other. But if any team really probably was the one that got shafted the most in all of it, it probably was the Cincinnati Bengals, if we're being honest. And as much as anything, this was a big, F you and fingers up to the league to say, I'm sorry, but, we're here to spoil the party. Joe Burrow looks a superstar. I hate that as a Cleveland Browns fan because this guy's going to be dominant for the next 10 years or more. He said himself, didn't he? His playoff and Super Bowl window is his entire career. It's difficult for, to sort of look at him, see what he puts out there week in and week out, and disagree with that. It's a phenomenal side. I looked through the other night when we were doing the Full 10 Yards podcast. There is nobody on the Bengals team that's made a significant contribution this season outside of the punter that is over the age of 29 years old.
Wow.
This is a phenomenally good and phenomenally young Cincinnati Bengals team. So, yeah, massive, massive result and thoroughly deserved. Yes, it was the 3 seed upsetting the 2 seed on the road, but this was one-way traffic. And probably, although the Eagles had a bigger win scoreboard-wise, this for me was the most impressive performance of the weekend because this was going in and dominating in a game that everybody had anticipated to be close, and it wasn't close at all.
Yeah, it was certainly the biggest surprise. We all expected the Eagles to sort of run away the Giants game. Maybe not to the extent that they did, but this one was a total shock. And then that leads us on to the final game, the one on Sunday night. The Dallas Cowboys lost out to the San Francisco 49ers 12-19. And I mean, I'm sure Jerry and Stephen Jones, along with Mike McCarthy, they've come away from this one wondering what could have been, because it was close at the end of the day. And I mean, certainly, Dak Prescott could have made a couple of plays, if he was, on the levels of Mahomes, etc., to win that game. Like it was in a balance. I mean, the day started and ended with a dumb Dak Prescott play. He almost took a safety at the very end of the game, which could have ended it before. Obviously, there was just a hook and lateral play, but I mean, he struggled this year, especially since his return from injury. He had the most interceptions in the league this year. It's been certainly more turnover heavy than it has been in recent years. And I mean, the Dallas defense played lights out, really keeping them in the game, especially against the high-powered Niners offense. Especially as well with the missed extra point from Brett Maher the year before. All the focus into the game was coming in from it was, will Brett Maher miss another extra point? And I'm sure that field goal that he made to keep Dallas in it really helped him the rest of the way. But I mean, it was close right until the end, where I mean that George Kittle grab off the helmet from Purdy, that right a dart right into the middle of the field. That play sort of changed the game and slung it more San Francisco's way. But I mean, my question is, do you think? I mean, do you think Dallas really want to pay Dak 30 million, $40 million a year when really he's nothing special? You know, I mean, he's been outplayed by, like Brock Purdy in recent weeks. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, look, we just had a similar conversation about Daniel Jones, didn't we? Is Dak Prescott better than Daniel Jones? Yes, he probably is. But again, is he good enough? I mean, let's face it, this guy is going to be paid like the best quarterback in the league next year. His cap hit this year was 19.7 million. Next year, his cap hit is 49.1 million. He's going to be accounting for the best part of 20% of the entire Dallas Cowboys salary cap next year, which, if he was winning them games and being the real difference maker, you'd sort of say fair enough, but he hasn't been. It's as simple as that. Look, he's not going anywhere next year. To cut him into dead cap hit of 89 million, so he's not going. But in terms of thereafter, the honest answer is who knows. I think he needs to have a really good season next year. The Cowboys didn't look much worse when Cooper Rush was playing this year, and he was earning the veteran minimum. So to answer your question, do I think he's worth it? The answer is no. If I was being brutally honest, I don't think he's worth what he's being paid. And as you say, this was a relatively tight game. The big difference really were those Dak Prescott turnovers. Those were the real key momentum swingers in this game, because it was pretty tight throughout, as you kind of expected it to be. I think they are two very, very good defenses, as you alluded to. I thought Dallas's defense was excellent, because this has been a pretty good, high-powered 49ers offense in recent weeks. I think Brock Purdy coming in has transferred the 49ers offense, and they really do seem to be a little bit more explosive. I think he's been trusted to throw the ball down the field with more regularity than previous quarterbacks have been in that system. But I thought they did a good job on Sunday in terms of limiting what the 49ers did offensively themselves. But yeah, two bad interceptions from Dak Prescott at key times in the game really sort of sucked the momentum out of it for the Cowboys. And a little bit similar to what I said earlier with the Chiefs, I was gutted really Sunday night, because I stayed up watching this, and it was one of those, because the scoreboard never got out of hand, I never found the time to go to bed. It was like, might as well stay and watch it to the end now. It wasn't the most entertaining. It was more intriguing than I would say entertaining. But it always felt to me watching it that, again, the 49ers had just got the Cowboys at arm's length. It always felt that they were just about going to be able to do enough. It was obviously comical at the end, the final play and all the rest of it. I'm not going to pile on too much, because the chances of them doing anything on one play from 75 yards was slim to none anyway. But it kind of felt like it was almost that was the way to end the Cowboy season, because, as always, they have threatened only to come up short, as they often do. It's almost worst case scenario for the Cowboys. You've mentioned the situation with Dak Prescott. I also think the fact they've reached the playoffs, they've won a game, it probably, and I think Jerry Jones has confirmed, means that Mike McCarthy's safe for another year. I don't think this franchise is going anywhere until they bring in somebody younger. They've got Kellen Moore potentially there as an option, that's been sort of, in the building previously, obviously attracting attention, so that's one route they could potentially have looked down. But yeah, it's a lot of questions yet again, I would suggest, for the Cowboys.
Yeah, I had in the back of my mind, I was like, imagine if they had Sean Payton, because he's available. Again, he got that long-term friendship with Jerry Jones, obviously haven't been in that building before. I just throughout the whole game when I was watching it with my mates at uni, I was like, this Dallas team, they've got so much potential. And they might not have an elite quarterback, but they've got the high-powered defense. They've got probably one of the best three defenses in the league. You got the weapons on offense. You got a great running game. Like, at the end of the day, I was thinking, if Sean Payton was available, maybe Jerry would go and make a move. But I mean, they won the playoff game, so they're going to keep Mike McCarthy. But yeah.
I think the running game's an interesting one with Dallas, because she was associated with having a good running game, and obviously Tony Pollard picked up an injury in this game. initially thought it was an ankle. I think it turned out to be a fractured fibula, which is going to mean a 3 to 4 month recovery. Now, obviously, we're months and months away from playing a game again, so that normally wouldn't matter, but it does matter because Tony Pollard's actually out of contract. So what a terrible time for him on a personal level to pick up an injury. But we've just talked about Dak's contract. If you're the Cowboys, what on earth do you do with this running back position? Because you committed all of that money to Ezekiel Elliott a few years ago now. And if we're being honest, it's kind of been a noose around the neck of the Cowboys ever since the day that contract was signed. They've struggled outside of CD Lamb at wide receiver this year because they traded away Amari Cooper for essentially a bag of peanuts to the Cleveland Browns. It was a 5th round pick, which, in hindsight was an absolutely awful trade for the Cowboys to have made. But that was a salary dump because they couldn't afford to pay everybody. Zeke, essentially, if he gets cut this year, is an 11.8 million dead cap hit. He's going to count for 16 million against the cap, whether he plays or not. So, they can only save 5 million essentially by cutting him. Now, whether they go that route or not, I don't know. But I struggle to see how they pay Tony Pollard as well. That's a real intriguing one. Lots and lots of questions for Dallas, I would say. And like I say, the running game's certainly up there as one of the biggest questions.
Yeah, they're certainly going to be one of the most interesting teams to follow in the offseason. Okay, so we're going to take a quick break now, and the other side of the show, we're going to be previewing the conference championship games. Just see you in a bit. Okay, so it's now time to talk about the conference championship games that are going to be happening this weekend. And I mean, first off, like we were saying earlier, Shaun, it is the 4 best teams in football. I'll probably say, other than maybe Buffalo, but Buffalo's up. But at the end of the day, I think Cincinnati are probably more complete, and probably the Niners and the Eagles are as well. Probably the 4 best teams over the course of this season, facing off, 2 in the AFC, 2 in the NFC, to have a chance to play in the Super Bowl in mid-February. And we'll start with the game that's on first, the NFC Championship game between the Niners and the Eagles. So the Eagles have got home field advantage. It's on 8 p.m. UK time, 3 Eastern. It's on Fox. The Eagles are favoured by 2.5, and it's obviously their first NFC Championship game since their Super Bowl win in 2017, 18 season. And I mean, what an outstanding rebuild from Howie Roseman, the GM. I mean, they've turned around the remains of the team that won a Super Bowl last time. I mean, and they've done very little, but it's made a big difference. Some of the moves they've made. I mean, some of the parts are free agents in the offseason, so it's a very sort of small window, but out of nowhere, they've from last year potentially they got a real chance to win the Super Bowl. They've shown, haven't
they? They have, and they've been the team with the best record in football this year. Throughout the course of the season, 14 regular season wins. A couple of those defeats came late in the season when regular starting quarterback Jalen Hurts was also out nursing an injury. And obviously by that time, they'd already long secured playoff berth and all the rest of it. So I wouldn't even have read too much into some of the games that they did lose. They've been phenomenal on both sides of the ball. They've been dominant. They've won the line of scrimmage, which it all starts from that line of scrimmage. I think, their production defensively has been phenomenal. If you look at the amount of sacks and all of those kind of things that they've managed to force this year, they've managed 70 sacks as a franchise this year, which, is pretty remarkable stuff. And when you go through the list, usually you'll find somebody's got an absolute pile and then everybody chips in with a few each. If you look at the Eagles, it's a totally different picture because you've got Hassan Reddick, who ended up with 16. He led the team. But then you had Brandon Graham, Joshua Sweat, and Javon Hargrave, all with 11 apiece. So to get 4 people with double figures is just a pretty phenomenal effort. Fletcher Cox got 7 as well, so he's not too far behind either. So that just goes to show that they're getting pressure from all over the field. They're getting from all different sorts of positions. They've got real depth and strength on that defensive line. They brought in a couple of big-name free agents towards the back end of the season, Linval Joseph and Ndamukong Suh, just to add depth. that's the kind of level of depth that they've got at the defensive tackle position. Those two aren't even real contributors when, in other times in their career, they'd have been considered stalwarts to build a defense around. So, defensively, they've been excellent. I think offensively, obviously the improved play of Jalen Hurts has been a massive, boost for the franchise in terms of probably speeding up getting to where they've got to. I think if you look at his numbers year on year compared to where he's been in previous seasons, 3,700 yards on the season from 15 games. That's up 700-ish yards on last year when he also played 15 games. But the big difference really has been, the fact that he's put 22 touchdowns on the board through the air and only 6 interceptions. He's really sort of slowed down the turnover rate. So that's obviously been a massive difference. And we talked about it during the playoff win against the Giants earlier, how they've just been dominant when it comes to the ground game. And the ground game has been, again, consistently great right throughout the course of the season. Whether it's been Jalen Hurts himself, because he's a real weapon when it comes to getting the ball across the goal line from a rushing perspective. He's had 13 rushing touchdowns on the season. He's actually their leading rusher when it comes to touchdowns, behind running back Miles Sanders, who's been the main ball carrier. But Boston Scott and Kenneth Gainwell also get their carries throughout the games as well. So they've got a real, wealth of weapons to attack you with in terms of the run game. And obviously on the outside, I think the off-season trade for AJ Brown was excellent. You look back at that one, and even at the time, to honestly, sort of, it's a bit of a strange move for the Titans to be pulling here. Because AJ Brown has been pretty good throughout his career. He's been in the league. This is his 4th season. He had 3 years at Tennessee. Again, this year career highs for him: 88 receptions, near enough 1,500 yards, 11 touchdowns. The Eagles will be more than delighted with that kind of production. And he's the total opposite. If you were to put 2 guys next to each other and say these two are partners, Devontae Smith and AJ Brown must be the 2 most unlike people, because obviously, Devontae Smith, I mean, he's 6 foot tall, but you're standing next to AJ Brown. He looks like about 4'5", doesn't he? So he's 6 foot and 170 pounds, Devontae Smith, according to his NFL.com profile. AJ Brown, he's 225 pounds, 6'2", but AJ Brown looks certainly well built, let's put it that way. But Devontae Smith, like I say, the ideal complement really. He's had 95 receptions for just under 1,200 yards. So they've got many different ways that they can attack you. They back that up with a really good stout defense. They deserve favouritism because they are at home, and I don't think that should be overlooked in terms of that home field advantage. It's called an advantage for a reason. But the fact that it's only 2.5 points, that's generally what you get for home field advantage. They usually give you a field goal start. So it goes to show how well matched these two teams are. And to be honest, I think if you'd have said to the Eagles going into these playoffs, the one team you want to avoid, it's the team they've ultimately ended up with, to be honest. I think they'd have took the chances with the divisional rival Cowboys or Giants or certainly the Vikings. I think they'd love the Vikings to have come and had a game in town. But the 49ers might be a different prospect. But certainly from the Eagles' point of view, they've got all the talent in the world on both sides of the ball.
Yeah, you mentioned there, Jalen Hurts' play has been a big reason as to why the Eagles have been so good this season. He's gone from one of the least accurate quarterbacks in the league. He's very regularly had like a 50% completion games to now looking like one of the most composed pocket passers in the league this season. He's got exceptional athleticism anyway. The legs, there's no question he can score with his legs because he got 13 TDs on the ground this season. His work as a passer has really elevated him to the next level. He's worked with Tom Brady's QB coach, Tom Hulse, this offseason. He's gone from, like I said, the average QB to being in the MVP conversation for most of the year. And ultimately, it looks like Patrick Mahomes is going to win that award because Hurts got hurt at the end of the year. But having one of the league's best receivers in AJ Brown and Devontae Smith, great side piece, as you say, has really helped. And again, cutting the turnovers to 6 all year, no fumbles, has been a big part of that. But yeah, Jalen Hurts has been outstanding this year, and I'm intrigued to see how this offense fares against the Niners' number one ranked defense in the league this season, because they're like they got Nick Bosa, in my opinion, the likely defensive player of the year. It was 18 and a half sacks, 2 forced fumbles, the best year of his career. And with the Niners in that Dallas game, I did come away with more questions than answers, because again, like they didn't blow me away like they have done in many of their games this season. But then when you look at it, they had the league's easiest schedule, so they've not really played many tough opponents. And there's no questioning the defense is elite, because they got all pros at basically every level on that defense. Linebacker, safety, Talanoa Hufanga, and you've got Nick Bosa. He's an outstanding defense that they've got to come up against in this game, right?
No, absolutely. Look, I think the difference with that Niners defense in terms of pressure, though, is as we were just talking about the Eagles, and I told you how many had got double-digit sacks. If you look at the Niners, Nick Bosa's got 8.5. The next player on there has got 5. If you can keep Nick Bosa quiet, which is obviously easier said than done, then potentially, certainly in terms of the pass rush, it's certainly not as violent a pass rush as what the Eagles can provide. But I think in terms of, like you say, the speed, I think Fred Warner as middle linebacker, he's one of the stars in the league in terms of that defensive position. He's all over the field. He's all action. And I think they are pretty good, throughout the back end, in terms of Hufanga, Gibson at safety. They've been a pretty good partnership. So they've dominated, like you say, on the defensive side of the ball. You've only got to look at the fact that, like you say, at the end of the season, they are ranked the number one defense. There's only been a couple of games this year which stand out as anomalies, which is they shipped 44 points to the Kansas City Chiefs and they shipped 34 points to the Las Vegas Raiders. Most other games you look at, it's below 20.
Yeah,
that's a phenomenal level of defense. So they really have been exceptionally good. And in terms of against the rush, which is obviously where the Eagles really do, like I say earlier, have a lot of success since their bye week, because they entered their bye week at 4-4. Let's not forget they haven't lost since coming back from their bye week at the end of October. If you look at the amount of rushing yards they've given up, take away that anomaly game that I said against the Las Vegas Raiders, which they still won because they scored 37 points themselves that day. They gave up 135 yards on the ground that day. That's the only time in the regular season they gave up any more than 79 yards rushing in that period of time.
It's nuts.
It is a ridiculously good rushing defense. So they've got all the pieces on that side of the ball to slow anybody down. And this is what I said earlier. I think this will be a really intriguing matchup. It doesn't scream shootout because the team defenses are just too good. This will be a game that I think comes down probably to field position. It probably comes down to your kicker having an excellent day. They say stats are stats that you can sort of manipulate. You can turn into whatever you want, positive or negatively. The one stat that I always am absolutely amazed by is that Robbie Gould, at the age of 40, has still never, ever missed a kick in the postseason.
Oh, I know.
Which is just absolutely unbelievable. When you think about the level of consistency, to be able to go through an entire career, he's played 15 games in the playoffs. He's made 29 out of 29 field goals that he's attempted, including 11 of 11 from 40 to 49 and 4 of 4 from over 50 yards. So don't get thinking that he just knocks chip shots over. This guy makes them from wherever they need to be made from. And as stupid as it sounds, something like that could really be the difference maker come Sunday, because they do seem extremely well matched. Offensively, I agree with you. They obviously didn't really blow anybody away on Sunday with what they were able to produce. But again, I think the Cowboys, defense deserves some credit for that. But I think this offense, as I said earlier, has looked a lot different with Brock Purdy at quarterback, which is ridiculous to say, really, when you think about it. But, Brock Purdy in his 5 games games, regular season games, had 13 touchdowns in 5 games. Jimmy Garoppolo played 10 games this year and only had 16. So he's almost in half as many games got the same amount of touchdowns. His yards per attempt are higher. His touchdown percentage throws are higher. So he really has been a real difference maker. I know there's a bit of a debate at the moment because he's obviously been announced as a finalist for Offensive Rookie of the Year, and some people say he shouldn't be involved in it. For me, for Mr. Irrelevance, as he was, to be taken as the last player in the draft to come in and produce what he has done, admittedly in a smaller sample size than others, but, I think what he's done has been nothing short of outstanding. And he really has, like I say, made this offense look a whole different level of exciting. The Christian McCaffrey pickup, you can look back and trace back to that, was a phenomenal piece of business. He's looked everything like the Christian McCaffrey that we remember from his pre-injury days at the Carolina Panthers, doing everything, whether it be on the ground or through the air. He's been an incredible pickup. Deebo Samuel and Brandon Ayuk have got the ability on any given play to be real difference makers. They obviously get Deebo involved in many different ways. You'll often see him in the backfield and those type of things. Brandon Ayuk is the traditional sort of, ZX receiver, stretch the field. And obviously with George Kittle, he's one of the best tight ends in the league. If it wasn't for Travis Kelce, he'd probably be considered to be the best tight end in the league, I would guess. So again, they've got weapons galore when it comes to the offensive side of the ball. I just can't see it being high scoring them. I just can't see it at all. Like I say, I think it will be a really intriguing, low scoring affair. I think if either team gets to 20 points, they're probably going to win this game. I just can't see either team giving up an awful lot more than that, to be honest. I'm saying all this now, and we'll probably be sitting here next week, so it'll probably be like 40 points to 35 or something stupid, but you just can't see it with the level of defense that he's on display in this one. But I think it's a really, really, really intriguing matchup. And in terms of for the TV audience and the neutral viewer, probably good to get the defensive battle out the way first. Most people probably want the splash plays and the offense and the points on the board. You'll probably get that in the second game, but this, I think, for the purists, will be a real, real quality watch, and I'm thoroughly, thoroughly looking forward to it.
Yeah, it's going to be a great one, and it's certainly the one that I find the hardest to pick out of the two, because I really don't know who's going to win it. I mean, you mentioned Brock Purdy. I mean, can the Mr. Irrelevant really take a team to a Super Bowl? Because I said it a couple of weeks ago. It's it's a great film, really, isn't it? I can see it. It's going to be a story. Someone's going to pick it up and make it into a film or a series at some point, because it's they've made the Sean Payton series and things like that. This is definitely going to be a film or a series at some point in the future. And I mean, the battle here, I mean, I think really is between in the trenches. Whoever can win the line of scrimmage, on both sides, will win this game. And I mean, for me, I'm going to be picking the 49ers, and I've been picking it all. I've been saying every week on the podcast, and everyone's done their predictions this season. I just think they're the most complete team in the NFC, certainly, and even with Brock Purdy, I mean, it just got some sort of fairy tale feel to it, and that's ultimately why I'm going to be picking the 49ers. What about you?
I've gone with the 49ers also. I just think that winning streak, like I say, now stands at 11 games. So they've forgotten how to lose. Like I say, I do think that Brock Purdy just has given them a different dimension. And look, I think it's a coin flip game. I don't mean any disrespect to the Eagles by picking the 49ers. I just think there is something written in the stars, to be honest. I mean, there is still the unbelievable stuff. I say unbelievable, I suppose you probably kind of expected that no rookie quarterback has ever actually got to the Super Bowl. It feels like this is the best opportunity anybody's ever going to have, because usually a rookie's brought in, let's be honest, because you're the number one pick in the draft and you've got to try and turn around the fortunes of a terrible franchise, is normally what happens to poor rookie quarterbacks. This kid's come in, he's got an unbelievable roster behind him. He's got a cracking defense, so it's probably as good a chance as anybody's ever going to have. I would probably just about give the 49ers the edge. And like I say, I think that spread from the bookies is telling -2.5. Like I say, that gives the Eagles a field goal advantage against the spread. And like I say, I think I'd be surprised if this game's won by 3 points.
Yeah, there you are. And I mean, you can't really say any more, really. I mean, the Niners, like you say, they've got the perfect roster, and then a rookie quarterback who has come in the moment. He's thrived, and that ultimately, I think, if that can continue into this game, will be what wins in the game. Anyway, let's get into the final game of the weekend. The probably, like I said, the most scoring game I think it will be between the two most exciting quarterbacks in the league. I'll probably say the two best quarterbacks in the league, in my opinion, right now, anyway, in Patrick Mahomes and Joe Burrow. And obviously, it's a rematch of the last year's game in the AFC Championship game, which the Bengals won. And again, in Arrowhead, will Joe Burrow make it 4-0 against Mahomes and the Chiefs this Sunday? Because like, especially if Mahomes banged up, like, this is a great opportunity for the Bengals to reach the second Super Bowl in a row. And like I said, if you would have said 18 months ago the Cincinnati Bengals would reach 2 Super Bowls in a row, Zach Taylor, he was in the hot seat, before the start of last season, and just everything. The Bengals is such a great story. Everything that's happened over the past 2 years. The emergence of Joe Burrow and staying healthy, and him somehow staying healthy behind that offensive line last year and this year. Now at the end of the year, he's in a very similar situation. It's this one's going to be. It's all about the quarterbacks, right? It's literally all. This is going to be a great game either way, and I mean, we had this debate in the chat the other day with all the 410 yards writers, but I mean, for me, having Nance and Romo on the call, it just makes it the best game of the weekend. I know they're divisive, but I mean, in my opinion, they make a football game, and it's going to be a great game with Burrow and Mahomes.
Yeah, it's all right. I can watch it on mute, mate, so it doesn't bother me.
Yeah.
I'm not Tony's biggest fan, but no, look, it'll be exciting because I think the game will demand that level of excitement. So I understand exactly what you're saying there, and all joking aside, I'm sure it'll be added as a spectacle with the commentary provided. So I mean, the Bengals are another one that we just talked about. The Niners on this win streak. The Bengals haven't lost since October the 31st. That's gone a little bit quieter for whatever reason. That doesn't seem to be talked about as much. Maybe it's because that Bills game was cancelled in the middle of it. So again, maybe they're not getting the credit that they deserve. I think in terms of the Bengals and in terms of Zach Taylor, I was one of the skeptics, if I'm being honest, because I thought a lot went, in their favour last year for them to get to where they got to. They ultimately took advantage of it, but they started this season 4-4, and didn't necessarily look like they were going to go anywhere near a repeat. But as I say, they haven't lost since that point. And they've won some games pretty convincingly during that stretch as well. You mentioned the fact that he's got an opportunity to now go 4-0 against the Chiefs, and we just said certain stats, are they really relevant? Well, I think something like that is relevant. This is 3 times in a row that everybody's perennial favourites, everybody's number one team in the AFC is the Chiefs. They're the number one seed, but whenever they play the Bengals, they can't beat them. There's just something to be said about when you've got the voodoo over a team. It happens in all sports, doesn't it? That you just get a bogey side or whatever. Now the Bengals are too good to be classed as a bogey side. They're just a good side. It's not a case of they're just lucky when it comes to this matchup. They're obviously a good side in their own right. I think Joe Burrow has, as I alluded to earlier, really become an elite quarterback in the league. I don't think he was ever really in doubt that he would reach this sort of level, but he really has, really stepped up. He had a phenomenal season this year, 35 touchdowns against just 12 interceptions.
Most of those came in one game as well against the Steelers.
Yeah, 4 on game 1, yeah. And like you say, he's the prototype quarterback pocket passer, isn't he? It's kind of almost a throwback in some aspects. So many teams have gone for a mobile quarterback, run pass options. Joe Burrow's just a prototypical stand in the pocket, find my open guy, throw the ball to him. So it's actually quite refreshing in a strange way to see him operate in a conventional manner. But he's been excellent. Obviously, we all know about his connection with Jamar Chase. Even in a reduced season for Chase where he missed 5 games, he's still going over 1,000 yards, which just goes to show the level of performance that he can produce. T. Higgins over 1,000 yards again as well. Tyler Boyd has got to have been has got to have become the best number 3 wide receiver in the league. He'd be everybody else's number 2 wide receiver, in all honesty. But he still caught 82 balls himself. That's more than a lot of teams' number 1 receiver will have caught this year. So there's an even distribution of the ball. I think Joe Mixon's underrated. He continues to sort of put some decent performances out there. So I think that the Bengals are a really, really good side on that side of the ball. I think their biggest improvements this year have been on the defensive side of the ball. They were a pretty good offense last year and they could win shootouts, but they often had to get involved in shootouts to win games because the defense wasn't as strong and wasn't as well-rounded as what it is now. I just mentioned the 49ers and the fact that they don't give up an awful lot of points. You have to go all the way back to the 20th of November for when the Bengals gave up more than 24 themselves. That's a pretty good standard to set. And again, outside of 2 games where they gave up 32 to the Cleveland Browns, of all people, on a Monday night football game, and then 30 to the Pittsburgh Steelers, the most they've given up in any single game outside of that is 24 points. So they have been really, really good in terms of the defensive side of the ball. I think DJ Reader, if he played a more significant position, would be in conversations for Defensive Player of the Year and those type of things. He doesn't get the splash plays because he's not a guy that's going to sack the quarterback an awful lot, but he's so stout against the run. They're really difficult to run against, and DJ Reader has been a big reason for that. He's one of those big dudes that just clogs up space. And he's been a real difference maker for them, playing a lot of snaps this year alongside BJ Hill, who's had an excellent season after they re-signed him in free agency last year. I think Trey Hendrickson, that trade from the Saints a couple of years ago, a lot of people, when they sort of made that move, looked at it and thought, "Ooh, that's a gamble." He'd had one good year really with the Saints. Fair play to him. He timed it well in his contract year, but he only really had that one good year. But he's continued on that form. He's been excellent again this season. Sam Hubbard obviously made the big splash play in the win against the Ravens the previous week, but he's another excellent piece on that line. Jesse Bates, arguably the best safety in football. They've got a decision to make there, whether they bring him back next year or not. So that'll be intriguing, but certainly for the time being, he's there and he's a massive part of what they do. And I think Cam Taylor-Britt, who's come into the team, he was a second-round pick, cornerback. He's been brilliant since he's been in. He's been a real quality find in the second round. So I think overall, they're a really, really excellent roster. I alluded to the fact earlier, nobody that's made significant contributions is over the age of 29, which is terrifying in a lot of ways, but obviously great for the Bengals that this is a team and a core that they can absolutely continue to look to build around. So they've got everything going for them. They really, really have. And like you say, I know we'll talk about the Chiefs coming up, so I'll let you sort of, introduce that if you like. But let's put it this way, if they haven't got the best version of Patrick Mahomes to play against, then it obviously becomes a much easier task, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I mean, you said you summed it up there well with the Bengals. I mean, they've got a lot of firepower. They could even have their 2 offensive linemen, Jonah Williams and Alex Cappa, back in this game as well. They're both questionable at the moment, so that'll be a huge addition as well. I mean, ultimately, this game is going to, it's very fine margins. The Bengals right now are favored by 1. So at the end of the day, and that's probably because of the Mahomes injury and everything going on there. It's a very, very tight game. I mean, ultimately, I think the way this game goes, the Bengals have probably got a better roster, but I mean, the Chiefs have got a slightly better QB and a better coaching staff as well, with lots of Andy Reid and Spagnuolo, who's, every time the playoffs come up, Steve Spagnuolo just becomes a superstar on calling those defensive plays. And I mean, unlike the Niners and the Eagles, who've both had some of the easiest games this season, the Chiefs and the Bengals, they're tested most weeks in the AFC because of how talented it is. And you mentioned the likes of the defensive players that the Bengals have. I mean, they've had a great year compared to last year. Like I said, last year there were lots of shootouts, and this year, I mean, they struggled against the pass a little bit. But when Chidobe Awuzie went down, that was always going to happen. And Cam Taylor-Britt has stepped up. He got 2 pass breakups and an interception in the game against Buffalo. One thing that I'm interested to see with the Chiefs, we mentioned Mahomes. He was a full participant in practice, so he should be good to go. It's actually looking a lot better, that high ankle sprain, now than it did on Sunday, which is good. But the Kansas City running backs have gained over 100 yards in all 3 of their games against the Bengals. So the Chiefs can control the ground game. That could be a big factor, and obviously that should take a little bit of pressure off Mahomes as well. And then one thing I also have, should put out there as well is I think Travis Kelce should have a sort of slightly quieter day. Now, it might not be the case with Travis Kelce; he can get open from any area sometimes, but the likes of Jesse Bates, Von Bell, and Daxton Hill, the rookie, at the back of that secondary, that's a very good set of safeties, and I mean, ultimately, they all look to shut down Travis Kelce. But I mean, for me, this one's, I just can't look against Mahomes and the Chiefs. I know they've lost 3 in a row, but something just feels different now. Especially, what I think I've sort of maybe even grown on the Chiefs more because they've been even better without, not maybe not even better, but they've just been just as good as they were before without Tyreek Hill. The Tyreek Hill trade, everyone coming into the season were like, oh yeah, will Kansas City be that good? They don't really have a number 1 receiver. They got Miko Hardman, Marquez Valdes-Scantling, and Juju Smith-Schuster. None of them are really recognized number 1 receivers, if we're being honest. And they've looked just as good. And if anything, it's taught me the Chiefs are just so hard to beat. The Bengals did it in the regular season, but I am going to go against the favorite here. I'm going to go for the Kansas City Chiefs to make the Super Bowl.
Yeah, look, I think, like I said, they're the number 1 seed for a reason, aren't they? And as you say, I mean, to be honest, I was one of those people that at the start of the year questioned how things would look and expecting a bit of a drop off. The reality is Patrick Mahomes has thrown for 5,250 yards this season, which is just absolutely scary, isn't it? He seems to have done that quietly as well, which is just bonkers, isn't it? But yeah, he is good enough to elevate the players around him. That's what separates the good quarterbacks and the elite quarterbacks. There's plenty of good quarterbacks. We mentioned the likes of Dak Prescott earlier. He's a good quarterback. He's not elite because he doesn't elevate the players in the same way that Patrick Mahomes does. And that's the real difference maker. I think obviously Travis Kelce, he's absolutely still the biggest threat. He's had 110 receptions on the season, 1,338 yards. He's the primary target still, regardless of whoever is on the outside. So that will be the first point of attack in terms of the Cincinnati defense. Obviously, I think in terms of the run game, you just mentioned the individual games against the Bengals, and they've had success on the ground. I think Isaiah Pacheco has obviously been an excellent find in the draft. Long gone are the days, it seems, that they were still persevering with Clyde Edwards-Helaire. I think it's definitely Isaiah Pacheco's backfield, certainly for the time being and moving forward. I think the move to bring Kadarius Toney in has been a little bit of a inspired piece of business as well, because obviously he was drafted very high by the Giants, didn't work out for whatever reason. Chiefs took a bit of a flyer, and it's kind of paid dividends for him. He's added another piece to an already explosive Arsenal. Doesn't feel fair, does it really, to be honest, that they've got so many weapons? But I think, to be honest, I was going to lean towards the Cincinnati Bengals in this game, and I was going to do that regardless of Patrick Mahomes' injury status. I just think they do seemingly have their number. I think the beauty of the Bengals on the offensive side, and this is why I find it interesting, if you said to the Bengals the Chiefs are going to run the ball, well, I think they'd take that. I think they'll absolutely take that, because I think the Bengals have got those big play weapons, and they are so explosive themselves that they could quite happily get involved in a shootout. I think the reality is, whoever does have success on the ground, I think ultimately this will come down to probably a battle of the 2 quarterbacks, and dare I say it might end up as a game of who's got the ball last.
Yeah,
because it just feels like one of those kind of games that they will both elevate their games. I said going into the games this weekend, I thought both Buffalo and Cincinnati in the wild card round didn't look great, and I said that I expected both teams to look a lot better. I got half of that prediction right, because the Bills still were pretty awful, but Cincinnati looked like the real deal. And I just think, like I said, there's a bit of a chip on the shoulder. There's a bit of an arrogance in a good way about Joe Burrow. I think he knows that he's meant for this. He's meant to be here. And I just think that, like I say, they, for whatever reason, seem to have the Chiefs' number at the minute. And I wouldn't be at all surprised if, again, when it comes down to it, I fully expect it to be close. like I say, I don't see it being any more than a one-score game. Both of these games that we've talked about, I think this one will be a lot more high-scoring, but I'll take the Bengals narrowly to get the win over Kansas City.
Yeah, well, there we are. Well, thank you, Shaun, for coming on. It's been great to talk all things ball with you. And I mean, ultimately, guys, enjoy the Conference Championship weekend. Obviously, it happens once a year, and it is one of the best weekends of sport on the sporting calendar, in my opinion. And I'm sure Shaun will agree with me. But yeah, thank you for coming on, mate. It's been good having you on. Yeah, have a good rest of the day, mate.
Cheers, Paul. Enjoyed it.
That's all right.